The purpose of today's lesson is to adapt an LLI text for our newcomer program. We are going to be working with book number 48, which is a level E in the blue system. I believe the green system might go up to level E. The blue system starts at level C, so this is definitely a little bit of a progression beyond the absolute beginning newcomer abilities, if you will. So this I think is kind of a nice it's a nice example when we start dealing with more complicated texts. I think that you can take the lessons from this experience and certainly apply them to even more complicated texts. So let's see what we have in this book to offer. Typically what I like to do before I start planning out a lesson plan is to do a quick walkthrough of the book. This is called Ants on a Log. I am going to be looking at things like vocabulary distribution, so the number of different words or the amount of repetition of particular words and phrases. I'm always trying to think beyond words into the phrasal level, because ultimately individual words tend to what we call collocate. That is to say, they work together frequently with other words, and what we want is for our learners to learn those collocations, because those collocations underpin how to use words in appropriate contexts. Okay, so I'll also be looking at the amount of text on the page. I'll also be looking for things like text organization, like paragraphs versus dialogue. Both paragraphs and dialogue are examples of discourse, and we want to push our learners up into the ability of producing discourse, not just producing single sentences with good grammar. We actually want them to be able to communicate. We want them to be able to communicate through writing, and let's face it, the standard of communication in writing is being able to write a paragraph or two or three. Similarly, in speaking, we want learners to be able to participate in conversations. Now, even though conversations happen between two different speakers, the conversation is in fact connected discourse, but it's distributed and co-constructed between two people, whereas a single paragraph is written by a single author. But both contain multiple sentences, and those multiple sentences are working around the same idea, so to speak. Okay? So anytime we have texts that model different types of extended discourse, that's another learning opportunity that's going to be helpful. And again, I just want to reiterate, our ultimate goal really is to always be pushing learners up into extended, connected discourse, whether it be spoken, whether it be written. Okay, so Ants on a Log. The twins came home from school. Hi, Dad, they said, can we have a snack? Okay, so I think this first page very quickly shows us that there's going to be some dialogue in this. Great. Okay, so that's going to entail some learning opportunities that we can explore. We could do dialogue completion tasks, right, where maybe we provide the learner with the first sentence or two, and they have to fill in the third sentence, and then we provide the fourth sentence, and what they fill in for the third sentence needs to make sense. So those are called discourse or dialogue completion tasks. That might be a possibility. In a way, it's kind of like a close, which is a fill in the blank, right? But we're actually taking it up to the sentence level. The other nice thing about dialogue, but it isn't necessarily exclusive to dialogue, is that there are a lot of sentence stems that are useful in real life. So can we have a blank is a sentence stem that is very usable beyond this book. That's kind of like, it's like a multi-tool that you can take into various situations in life. when you're asking somebody for something. Okay? There may need to be some kind of practice where it becomes, can I have a blank, right? But we're good with that. We can teach that, and we have a model in the text that demonstrates its purpose. Okay. Kids also get a model of a greeting, right? And the other thing I noticed from the first page is that it's written in the past tense. So, unlike perhaps an expository nonfiction text, we now have the potential for some extensive practice with perhaps a variety of verbs and learning their past tense forms, right? So we've got came, we've got said, okay? Noticing, that this is a convention that will have to be taught to learners, that anything that's happening outside the quotes like this is referring to what is happening inside the quotes. So that learners and speakers have to make sense of that. And of course, if you're already a literate individual, then you are good. But if you did not have the benefit of extensive literacy experiences growing up, having to explain the relationship between this is what the narrator says, but this is what the characters say. Okay. Right, so the dialogue continues, and I think what's also interesting, and this probably isn't the first text where we see this, right? But it's an opportunity ultimately, after we've done with language, to talk about or study in some way, even if we're not having a conversation, things like punctuation and quotation marks and stuff like that. Again, that's not a burning priority for ESL to do from the beginning. It is something we all get to, but I know that language arts teachers, they jump on this stuff because it's part of their curriculum for whatever grade, right? But we don't really speak with punctuation. Punctuation is not part of our language faculty that we are genetically endowed with. Okay? It's a convention of writing, and we just want to make sure we are mindful of its place in our instruction, which is not first and foremost. We are trying to make sense of sentences like, what do you want to eat? Okay? I just popping out of my, what I observe immediately for this is, if you can imagine that you are using this book with a high schooler. The high schooler is in charge of getting a snack together for their little brother or sister when they come home from school, and this is exactly the kind of thing that an older sibling could say to a younger sibling. Equally, if you're doing adult ed, I think this book is absolutely relevant because it's a dialogue between a parent and a child, and we could say that the language that is modeled here is useful, and so parents would be interested to know how they talk to their child. And there's so much talk by parents about food where it comes to their kids. It's just a fact of life. Okay, another sentence stem. I want, I want, I want. Right? We have also an exclamation that is fairly idiomatic. I know. That's another way of saying I have an idea. Okay, so we could teach that as a phrase. So when somebody's about to make a suggestion, right, and we signal making suggestions, this might be a preamble to it. Okay, so could be another element to our language objective. So here we have how to make a suggestion, right? And this could be another thing that gets explored. It would actually apply for teacher talk, because teachers are always saying let's make, let's do, let's. So students need to know how to interpret that. So maybe I could spin this into some kind of activity where I pretend to be, I don't know, the art teacher, or even just a teacher doing a hands-on activity. And I'm going to start with that, and then I would ask students to make the suggestion, right? And I would expect them to start with a let's make a, right? And so this whole phrase, let's make, and then a line underneath as a blank could be filled out as well. We got reactions, we have negatives. Okay, so we like, and we don't like. Okay, we also have the future, will like. Okay, so it's actually kind of interesting. We have verb morphology speaking, so students will be able to interpret and reproduce, or interpret and ultimately form their own sentences using negation, using future, when it comes to likes and dislikes. I don't know, something like that. Another piece of verb morphology I see in this book is can. Okay, so there's lots of can. Okay, we could have a quick mini lesson on how to use the word can. So it's can plus the present tense / base form of the verb. Okay, and how that is distinct from, look, you get can get, and this form is in the present tense base form, but when we're in the narration of the event, it turns back to past. And so learners have to be able to navigate both the present and the past. And the extent to which you teach grammar explicitly is something we can have a conversation about, but getting learners at the very least to notice and be able to interpret is a worthwhile endeavor. Okay. So there's also, I'm looking at this page, right? So we've got something that would ultimately support literacy as well, which is typically the point of this whole system. There's a lot of repetition of words. Okay, so we're now getting a lot of repetition of words, but a lot of more words at this level E. We got can, we got, and get, right? And then we got a bunch of function words. Okay. And we've got said, we've got it inverted, we got dad said, and also said dad. So these kinds of variations could be something either you choose to explicitly talk about, or it's just something that you as a teacher observe, and you just want to make sure that the kids are interpreting it correctly. So, because when word order changes, especially if you're coming from a different language, you might get a little confused at first. Okay, another thing to notice, I believe I saw future tense here, right? Will, but look, we now have the abbreviated form. So both forms exist in this text, and maybe that is something that I want to have a mini lesson about. Okay, so the extent to which it is a new mapping is, or whether it's just something I'm building fluency around, would require me to just go back and look at the previous texts to see when contractions for future of verbs, is first mentioned in the text series. Okay, what's great about working with this text series, but making it our own, is that we get to see the first time that a particular grammatical or lexical item gets modeled. And then we can build our lesson plans from there with an understanding of continuity from text to text to text, and also from lesson to lesson to lesson, so that by the time you and your learners get to lesson 48, maybe it's not going to be taking 4 hours to take this book apart and put it back together again and study all the little pieces of language, because in fact you already taught get, so they already know that, so you don't have to teach it at that point. And so really what you're doing by the time you get to lesson 48 is you are now looking for something new. Okay, so you're building fluency around something that is already known and already taught, or maybe enriching it and extending it in some kind of way by adding a variation. Okay, or you are mapping something new, right? What do we do now? Again, this is a question that it's useful beyond the text. It's the kind of thing that when a child is waiting in process for something and waiting for the next command, that's exactly what we say, right? So there's useful language beyond the text. Okay. We have words. Well, first of all, something like now reminds me that, in fact, they are following a process. And so we could have a lesson plan where we ask the learners, based on the text, to order sentences like it's a cookbook, but put them in the correct order, right? What goes first, second, or third, and they move the sentence strips around. Okay, so that's going to be a potential activity. Prepositions on top of and under. Okay, so another learning opportunity here. And I would teach on top of as a phrase. Okay. So if I were to do a close, I would actually create a blank here that covers these three words on top of. Okay. And then, let's see, back to dialogue and just sort of basic interaction stuff. We've got the word sure. Okay, so how do you accept a suggestion, right? So the function is one person makes a suggestion and the other person ratifies or rejects the suggestion. And the way we ratify a suggestion is to say sure or yes. Okay? And we could also teach manners and say, is sure good enough? Or how does a child reject a suggestion? Do they just say no? Or is there something else they could say? And again, we could explore those, but you'd have to have a specific level of learner in mind. I don't think I would be exploring that with my beginners, at least not at first. There's also some question grammar here. So we have a how question. And again, in terms of life utility, this is the kind of thing that really, in a lot of respects, models teacher talk, right? So teachers are always making suggestions. They are always asking students for information about what they're doing, right? And this book really does kind of look like a good model for exploring some elements of teacher talk. Okay. And so how would I teach that? Let's see. Well, we're all done. How does it look? Okay. So yeah, not only are you helping the learners understand what the teacher is asking or what dad is asking, but in a lesson it's what the teacher would be asking. But you also have to teach the responses. Okay, so this is where me and my three kids in my morning lesson, we'd all be sitting around and I have one student that gets a bad version, an ugly version that looks terrible, and then another version that looks absolutely beautiful, and then there's one in the middle. And maybe I would we'd all point and agree on the piece of celery that looks absolutely terrible and torn up, and we would say, oh, it looks terrible. So we would model that response so that they could answer, how does it look? Oh, it looks terrible. Or, oh, it doesn't look bad. Or, oh, it looks awesome. Okay, so I think the important thing is that we're not just interpreting the text, especially when we're thinking about taking language from the text and extending it into real life scenarios, like this book lends itself to lesson scenarios where there's teacher talk between the student and the teacher, where the teacher is asking a question and the student is expected to respond. You can spend some time extending this model into some skits or rehearsals or activities where students get to practice that kind of dialogue. Okay? Looks like. Right? And look like. So this is a fairly idiomatic thing that would definitely make it to my vocabulary list. Okay? All right, so this is part 1. Okay? I've just modeled how I would do a text walkthrough and look for some opportunities for lessons. There's certainly opportunities for extending words and particularly phrases and sentences / utterances beyond the book to kind of creating some live role play type stuff where students can rehearse more language of schooling. And we're using this book as a springboard to go into that.